best is yet to come? Maybe. So far I've liked this one the best every time I've played it. This is Sevastopl. Now, it shares a lot of the rules with Lille. Again, I was kind of surprised with how much it shares. One of the things, when I was reading Sevastopl's rules, I realized all my discussion about in Lille, the French being able to hide their troops behind the front lines, a little off the wall. Yeah, that's somewhat true, but not entirely. Which is to say, once the parallels get close enough, they really can't do that. And once the parallels are close enough is when I was firing. The reason is there's an advance rule, and that applies here. I probably should be introducing this game, though. And we'll get to that rule when we get to it. So this is... Oh, damn it. I forgot to look up what Lancaster... Oh, yeah, Lancasters are rifled guns. Okay. I did look it up. So this is the prize of the Crimean War. And the whole point behind the mess, all the events of the Crimean War, as opposed to the Turkish-Russian engagements that happened as a prelude to the Allied interventions, really are centered on taking Sevastopol. And you'll see, you've got your balaclava. Yeah, not the baklava. Balaclava, you've got your Inkerman, you've got your unknown French battle that I can't remember what it's called, but it starts with a T, and we'll get to it. Those are all battles intended to weaken the Allied position besieging Sevastopol. Sevastopol is also kind of interesting because the Allies never really fully blockaded the city. So what you'll see is hordes and hordes of Russian reinforcements making it into the city. The map is a little different from Lille's, and actually I find it, although nowhere near as pretty, there's something almost hideous about this map. It grows on you, trust me. If you're looking at it and saying, "Oh my God," yeah, that was my first reaction too. But the game is enjoyable enough that the map actually has become somewhat pleasing to me. It doesn't bother trying to depict the entire defense works of the city. It worries about a few key things: these bastions, and it connects them with these kind of off-map boxes, including in transits. There's these reserve boxes where you've got troops in the bastion. And that's sort of what I was talking about with the French troops being able to hide behind the walls. Well, that's what the Russian troops are doing here. They're still somewhat vulnerable there. They're vulnerable to mortar fire from the best I can understand of the rules. The rules are a little obscure here, in part because they don't adequately keep their definition of siege artillery and siege guns separated. Siege artillery, I think, includes all the different types of siege artillery present, which includes the siege guns, the mortars, and the Lancasters, which look very much like mortars, but really aren't anything like them, except that they have unlimited range. Okay. And you're saying, well, the mortars in Lille didn't. Nah, but these are big, big guns firing on this city. This is written up as the first modern siege. We're talking about a long siege of a city, in part because they couldn't blockade the damn thing. All right, what do we have? Well, let's look at this map first of all. You got this kind of contour map going on here. None of that really matters too much. What you've got is basically color zones. The city. This yellow is hill region. The tan is flat. The pale green is a depressed area. Very sad. And then these are ravines, which are essentially impenetrable for parallels, but you can build saps through them, if you remember from Lille. We'll discuss that a little bit more, but we've got these two types of pieces. Saps, which allow you to make forward motion in your entrenchments, and parallels, which allow you to build eventually a position from which to assault. And like in Lille, there's going to be restrictions on how you can build these. And then they're used for some additional ways. You also have these off-map supply areas, which, damned if I remember how they work. And another one here, and we'll get to them at some point in the roles. Got a joint ammunition supply track. Instead of throwing, they don't have casualties marked in this game, which thank the Lord, because boy were those annoying in Lille, and I was continually forgetting and trying to make up numbers to fill them in. Also got a actual terrain key that's kind of nicely positioned here. One thing that's not so nicely positioned, well, we'll talk about it. So there's a number of bastions on the city, but there's this one other one here. This is the Mamelon. And it is abstractly represented back here so that it doesn't mess up the map where entrenchments would, where you want to build parallels, etc. This is a forward position, kind of like a breakwater. I don't remember what the proper term for it is. We had them at Old Fort Niagara too, and I'm sure Lille had them, but there were none of any significant power. This one's sitting on an impressive hilltop. You can see I've got a number of field guns built into it, and then there's also enough defense works there that I can keep some Russian troops in a reserve box within it. That's what those things are. They're the bastion reserves. That's where I keep all my troops to protect them for now. But as the parallels get close to a location, I'm going to have to bring my troops out front for one reason, and this is the thing that I got mistaken about in Lille, and actually towards the end of the assault probably screwed the Allies over a little bit with. If you move into an assault box, you're allowed, with an Allied unit, or in this with a French or British, you're allowed to advance into an empty bastion box immediately. The defender doesn't get a chance to move up. The reason that I screw that up is in both of these rules sets, that's covered under advance after combat rather than the movement rules. There's no reference to it in the movement rules, and it sounds like an Allied attacker would just move up into that box and stop there, and then the defender would have a chance, maybe not from here, but from here, to move forward a space and then defend it. These bastions are going to be a little different, though, from the Lille wall treatment, which is to say I shoot at the bastion as a whole. We don't have multiple... we don't have sort of per wall integrity boxes in this. Instead, each bastion has its own integrity, including this little outpost here. And those can get blasted down. More than that, they can also get built up. The Russian defenses were not as powerful as they could be, and we can bring them up to an 8. What does that do? Well, we'll see. Likewise, we have Allied reinforcements coming in. Also, we have this trickle of ammunition that's going to be coming in throughout the game. Let's see if we can zoom in there. Over here we have the ammunition. Now that can be any kind of siege gun as far as I can tell. And again, that's probably the same in Lille. There's no reason why the Chevalier de Luxembourg could not have hauled mortar rounds in. And that makes sense to me, and not just me, apparently. But I ended up playing it so that only the siege gun rounds, siege gun rounds were allowed in. Again, it's not just the nomenclature, though. The rules seem to kind of be a little loose with it as well. Okay, on your units, well, you have somewhat different information. You don't have big 400 units or whatever. You have a base strength point and a morale rating. The morale rating is going to work similarly to Lille, but we'll go over all the rules just because I feel like chattering. And maybe I'll do a better job than I did on Lille. The other thing is some of the units are going to have their turn of entry marked on them, which is always a helpful thing to have. I like it when games tell me when and where things go. So we have a sequence of play, again, like in Lille, which is going to run through a planning phase, a battery phase, then a construction and operational movement where the Allies are able to move their troops between different zones. And we have several different zones in this. There's a French left area, the English have the center, and then there's going to be a French right siege area as well. But that's not available until July 1st. And even then, I have to figure out how to get troops into it, which can be kind of a tricky situation. There are different ways to do it. Obviously, the French can just walk around because, for the most part, they control the land around here. But in order to expedite things, I can build entrenchments to extend over to there, and there are rules for that. All right. Then we go to an optional assault phase, like in Lille. This is up to the Allies. Do they want to make an attack or not? Unlike in Lille, you're not going to be sitting kind of partially holding a bastion for days without the defenders having a chance. And they're not French in this game. Without the defenders having a chance to repulse you or something like that. You either take the bastion during an assault phase or you do not. If you don't take the whole bastion, you failed at taking it and you have to go back. And the goal for the game is to take 2 bastions, one of which must be a major bastion. And we'll get to the definition of which ones are major in a little bit, because I can't do that off the top of my head. And then the Russians are allowed to do some sort of operational movement within their territories, within their defensive works, in order to, reposition defenses where they're needed. And then they're also allowed to do some construction and repairs. Mainly that's going to be repair work, but they have this one guy, Tottelman, their engineer, who's going to allow them to actually improve the position and build up improved defense works. And right now I've got him focused here for when we actually start. Okay. And then, like most of these, you're going to be trying to... So, in this one, certainly you are going to be trying to knock down the walls, but there's an interesting factor here. This is a naval... what is my word that I want to look for? Not depot. This is essentially the major Black Sea naval port for... Is there non-naval ports? Yeah, I'm sure. For the Russians. This is the headquarters of their navy, and they've mainly sunk their ships to help defend the harbor, but they've stripped a lot of the guns off. They have essentially unlimited guns, which is handled a little differently. It's not as unlimited as you think. It's mainly these guys are considered unlimited. But they also have the big siege guns here, which are located in these boxes. Now, they're going to be targeting from the centerpiece of the bastion at all times. Just for the range chart. You have a slightly different range chart here too. This one goes out to 1,200 yards. It's a little longer, and I don't know if you can see, but I kind of damaged mine. I was very sad about that. So there's a slight imperfection in my ranges. It's not a game where you get things perfected anyhow. Oh yeah, so the Russians also actually have more ammunition throughout the course of the game than the Allied troops do, for whatever that matters. So let's kind of briefly go through what the feel of the game is, and then we've got some specifics. So one of the specifics is, during the planning phase, there's this Russian field army intervention segment. And in that, the Russians have 3 battles that they can call here. Balaclava, Inkerman, and Chernaya. Hopefully I'm pronouncing those close enough. And in each case, now, you have to pick one that's allowed for that turn. So, for example, here only Balaclava and Inkerman but as you go later in the game, eventually they all become available. I'm not quite sure. I think it's in the next spring. Yeah, this goes through 2 winters, right? No, that's June. Okay. Yeah. All right. So just basically a year's siege. Still, that's a long-ass siege. Okay. And the Russian can choose an option on a given turn, but he can't do them. Oh, March 1855 is when you're allowed to do Chernaya. You're allowed to do them on non-winter turns, and you can't do them on consecutive turns, but otherwise you can have them take effect, and you will be rolling on this table. And each one has different effects. Balaclava is going to be a number of turns during which the British get no artillery. So you may want to look at what artillery rounds are going to be due, and I think that's the number here, although that asterisk means something different from artillery. I think it's got to do with the engineers, and I'm not quite sure. Inkerman is going to pull a bunch of Allied units off the map for a turn, and this must be taken from the British and the French right areas. So you probably want to do that when you feel this is finally threatened. This is an important position because it dominates this area. So if I'm cutting parallels through here, okay, I can maybe get through there, but let's see, because we're going to have that, yeah, that's going to be like that, so I'm pretty safe there. But if I push out, let's put another one there because just to make it legitimate. If I push out here and then decide to build one here, I could probably build one coming off there, but you can see I'm already probably cutting that parallel with an enfilade shot, which means it would just be destroyed. Now, I might be able to get away with this. That looks pretty legitimate. But now, this one, I can't tilt it on the back. I was screwing up that in Lille. I can only tilt it this way, so I want to keep this as flat as possible. But I'm kind of heading the wrong way, and I'm not going to be able to build parallels through the ravine. So I'm really going to have trouble getting a grasp on anything on this side of the board until that's gone. So that's going to be kind of, that's why that's so heavily defended by the Russians. But if you look carefully, I have my best units there. I have my engineer there. I have a siege gun. I didn't put a mortar there, even though mortars are affected by range, for the simple reason that I don't want to lose a mortar. I have very few mortars in this game for the Russians. But my intention is to make this hellish for the Allies to take, because if the British take that, they've then got a route to this gun. Do they have a route to these? The rules are kind of annoying about that. I think I could kind of dig my way through here, maybe, but I'm not sure. It would really depend on whether I could get, yeah, I think I could. I could get something like that built, which means I could kind of pass by here. But what I can't do is actually use this with the Brits. The French, however, can consider that as a starting point once they're over here, and they can build entrenchments, the siege works directly out of that, which is a pretty powerful jumping off point, you know, as they get closer and closer to this. And the Brits could, of course, come closer in that direction, as I showed. But the main thing is it opens up an attack over here, perhaps. Okay. And this is important for the French because it's going to be kind of tough for the French to actually well, they could build a sap coming out of here. See, they have the divide right here, so they can build a sap here and they can come right at it too. What they can't do is build parallels through here, but that's no biggie. That's behind their start line. If you look, the start line is actually right along the ravine. All right, and the third one, Chernaya, is going to create additional replacement points for the Russians. Basically, they've broken through and created a way for more troops to come into play. Now, I'm not sure what's on the chart. What does it say here? Turn date, construction points, reinforcements. All right, so maybe replacement points are a fixed value that comes in each turn per side. We'll see that when we get to it, which is in the next section. Reinforcements are on the turn record track. Replacement rate. The replacement rate is indicating the number. At the start of the game, the Russians get 1 per turn, which can be increased after Chernaya. The Allies get 1 French reinforcement replacement point each turn. And this is damaged units coming back, or dead units coming back. And in March 1855, from then on, the British get a replacement point per turn. And if you don't have a unit to replace, well, you lost your replacement point. And you should be fighting harder. There are going to be some attrition turns, which I'm trying to remember if there's any marking. They may be the gray turns. This is impossible for me to read here. But I don't think it marks that. Let's see. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 13. Yeah, that sounds like the gray turns are going to be attrition turns. 1 in the high summer, the rest through the winter. And you roll a die for each nationality and look on the attrition table to see what you lose. And again, you know, there is nothing you can do about this really. You add 1 during winter. You add 1 for the French in 1855 June, but you subtract 1 from the British starting in March 1855, which basically means, I think, oh no, there's a March. Is this a March turn? Yeah, that's that one. And that's to represent Florence Nightingale. Oh, yeah, I don't have a real bird like Gilbert Collins does. I love hearing his bird on the videos. I miss having birds, but not enough to actually want one. Okay. Siege batteries. How are they going to work here? So they're kind of a little twisted here. A little different from Lille, at least. Not necessarily twisted. So you have different kinds of ammo for different kinds of guns, and each type of gun has its own ammo types. You check the ammo supply chart to see if you have enough units in the supply boxes to get the ammunition. So that's what these suckers are for. And that's going to be based on this. You're going to have a certain number of units, and you get a certain number of points. Where it says mortars and Lancaster, you get one of each. You get 1 of each. Well, 2 of each down here. And you get them defined by type. And those units just have to be in place, and I probably should remove a couple of Russian units from the map and a couple of Allied units to make sure that on turn 1 I actually get my ammo. Let's see if I can remember that. And you simply get it if you have the points there. Those are going to be, every time you fire an artillery, you spend 1 off. And you roll, and this is just like Lille, over here on the siege battery fire chart. We do not know what the modifiers are though yet. And we're going to have a base. Oh, the modifiers are the range, just like in Lille. So this little chart gives you the modifiers on each. The further out you go, the more of a penalty you get. Now, mortars have unlimited range, but if you go beyond 1200, you're paying the -3 penalty that you're paying at 1200, which is basically to say, you know, you really don't want to fire these things from long range. What we don't have in this game, which we had in Lille, was the gun galleries. We're allowed to put guns in any entrenchment, I believe. Maybe I'm wrong. Let us make sure. Because I seem to remember they actually are allowed to be in a location. It's going to be under operational movement. Yeah. You can move your siege guns from behind the Allied start line into a siege work position. They're going to be limbered when they're moved, though. We don't have a way to mark that except to flip them over to their blank side. That means they can't fire until they've spent a whole turn unlimbering. So it takes you some time, just like in, actually it may take more time than it does in Lille, to deploy your guns. Because you have stacking limitations, and one of the things I screwed up in Lille was I forgot that guns count against, or I didn't read that guns count against the stacking limitations. When I read rules, I'm not very careful, as you may have noticed. What else do we have here? Okay, so the Lancaster battery is not going to be affected by range at all. And from what I understand, it fires as if it's a mortar. Now, it's rifled. I don't know why it has a terrible advantage there. Why it's firing vertically or whatever. The siege guns have a maximum range of 1,200 yards, which is pretty much what... In reality, you don't want to fire your mortars out at that range, probably, unless you have some reason to kill off enemy units and know where to put a gun. I don't know. It's possible. And when you fire there, you're going to be taking damage on here, which indicates a level of damage to the thing you're hitting, as well as a number of units you kill. Now, I'm not sure why this is stuck under here. There's obviously a misprint. I think it's just a duplication of this, and you can ignore this. This should just be a dash here. I hope. Let's see. Did they catch that? No. Okay. But we have something with asterisks here. Ah, yes. So there can be asterisks on here, which indicate you've blown up a siege dump. And those will kill 2 rounds from the person who is affected by them. So if you get an asterisk firing on the Russians, they lose 2 rounds at that point. Now, the units that are lost, if the bastion level is 0, if you've blown it completely away, you can hit, and I guess that's with no counter, you can hit the guys in the reserve areas. If the bastion level's not 0, the mortars can hit the guys who are in there. Now, what about damage? Do the mortars do damage is my question. Oh, wait, hold on. Russian units destroyed may be destroyed by fire directed at the bastion. No, I lied. So this is worded differently elsewhere, but it's very clear here. So if the bastion level is 0, Lancasters and mortars can kill the people in here, but only Lancasters and mortars can. They're firing basically over the defenses completely. Leaders, engineers, and artillery are unaffected. Allied units can be blown up in the siege works that they're in. It looks to me like mortars are able to damage the bastion itself in this game. They were not nil-nil. All right, let's go to the siege work constructions. So siege work constructions is very much like in Lille. You come out perpendicular to your start line with a sap. Then you're allowed to stick one of these or two of these off it, and they're going to cost you. Now the cost is based on the terrain, again like in Lille, but the terrain costs are different. 2 points each in flat or hill. Depressions are 4 each. You get to ravines and you're only allowed to build saps. And, well, the Allied start line you're only allowed to build saps. Those are 2 each. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. I think that's indicating this kind of thing, but this is going through a ravine, so you'd be paying, so I don't know. What's different here is you can only have 1 sap, and then you have to go to parallel. And then once you have 3 parallels, you can build another sap coming out of that. And I think the ordering is the same, but I'm not absolutely certain, which is to say that you can get only 1 sap can be constructed from a line for every 3 parallels, and 1 sap can allow you to build 6 parallels from it. So you can, again, kind of reverse pyramid if you like. I don't know how big an effect that is, though, because of the terrain limitations. Maybe over here on the French side, it'll be more likely that something like that will happen. All right, you're also allowed, and probably wish to, construct between Allied siege areas. There are 3 different sections which are delimited by these ravines, although there are ravines. There's a ravine here between the British areas and another one here. That's all one area, though, and the Brits are allowed to... This is all considered one thing. All the troops there are in the same place. I've just got them organized. I don't know. These units are of the left wing. These units are listed as the right wing. So I divided them up that way to make myself happy. I've got these guys by brigade as well. That's important. Brigades are going to be important because when you launch an attack, it's by the number of brigades that you can send. Okay. So in order to connect the left siege area with the British siege, either British or French units can construct the saps. Now, whenever you make a construction of a new unit, you've got to flip a couple of guys over to their digging side, and so on. You'll see it more in play. But that's just a way to A, force units onto the board where they can get shot, and also to use up your units so that you can't use them on an assault. It also fills up the new siege works, which means you're not going to launch an assault from those newly built things. Repairs, which cost less. I don't know if they cost 1, 2. I don't have that right in front of me. You can repair these things. There we go. Is 1 point for bastions. That's not it. I'm looking for the word repair. My guess is it's 1 point and you only need 1 unit in there to repair a siege work. That's the way it is in Lille. I'll probably look that up. Bastions can also be repaired. They cost 1 point each to be repaired a level. And you can do that anywhere, but you need 1 Russian unit in the bastion for each point of repair that you spend. I'm kind of getting off the line of where I was, but these guys have a little pickaxe and shovel, but they don't use it. It doesn't restrict their movement in any way. You don't actually flip them over. You can flip them over as a bookkeeping exercise to help you remember how many points you've repaired somewhere. If you want to upgrade a bastion, it costs 2 repair points, and you can only do that where your engineer is. And we haven't talked about where you get your points for them either, but let's go back to what we were trying to talk about, which is this construction between siege areas. And this is where I have to focus in on the rules because I'm not used to this one. All I've done is read it. So yeah, you can use French or British units to try to connect these 2 siege areas. And basically what you're going to be doing with this is you just build saps here. And they're allowed to cut through there. Now you do the same thing for this very easy connection between the British and the French right area, but only British units can help with that. And what that allows you to do is when you have both of them, you can transfer French units over to here, assuming it's July 1st or later, without having to take them off map. If you don't have that build, it takes 2 turns off map to make that transference. Okay. Yeah, how do you get those construction points? Each game turn you get a certain amount listed on the game turn record track, which is the numbers here. I thought that was the ammo, but no, it's the construction points. Now what does the asterisk mean? Okay. Well, they're per nationality, so British points can only be used by the Brits, French points only by the French, and same thing with the ammo. But we've got these leaders too. Engineering initiative bonus. The Russian player has 1 engineer, Tadelbein, and the Allies have 2, a French and a British. You roll a die for each one to try to get their bonus of 2 construction points. The Russian, it's on a 1 through 4 that he gets them. The English 1 to 2, the French 1 to 3. Some turns have an asterisk on them, which indicates that if they get their bonus points, that's doubled to 4 for that nationality. So that's the addition there. Okay. Up. Pain here for some reason. Excuse me. Okay. I'm gonna have to plug in, which sucks. Alright. So each construction point basically costs 1 unit. It's activity for both the Russians and the Allies. Allied movement is very similar to in Lille. You're basically allowed to shift around throughout your siege works to any extent as long as they're connected and all under repair. If things are busted, you're going to have to fix them before you can move around through them. And that's during the operational movement phase. For the Russians, things are a little different. Let me see if they're allowed to move infinitely. I think they are. Basically, you count in transit boxes and these suckers. And I think it's only in tactical movement that you actually have to worry about the distance. That would make sense because these turns are long enough. So we're just going to assume that. Okay, so like in Lille also, you have to garrison your parallels, but you have less of a requirement. It's only the 4 forwardmost parallel counters in each siege area. So it's a little bit less of a requirement than it was in the other. All right, again, like in Lille, there's going to be an assault phase. And when you move on the map, you're going to use this little thing. And instead of 100 yards, you're allowed to move 150 yards per turn. There's going to be 5 of these little impulses. You move up across the terrain. You're not affected by the terrain itself for your movement rate, but it is going to affect your chance of getting shot, which we have to go to in a little bit. Tactical movement for the Russians involves, let's see, how many little things? Interbastion movement. It looks like we gotta have a number here somewhere. There's no limit to the number of bastion positions you move through as long as you're not adjacent to an enemy unit. If you move adjacent to an enemy unit, you must stop. Moving between these things, though, is going to cost you 1 full move per action, per impulse. And I'm not quite sure. I know you can come out of these essentially for free into the bastion area. I think it costs you a move to move back into them, though. All right. The field batteries. These are your main defense against troops that are marching forward. And this is why the Allies have to build these siege works. If these didn't exist, they could just walk up and march up to the fort. But those guns are what are going to prevent you from doing it. They have an effective range of 600 yards, which is out to here. And you can see that, yep, crap. That hits you about here. And that's going to be a problem throughout the game, is me holding the camera and trying to do that measured movement. We found that out in Lille. Okay. So the Allied goal with these, I've mentioned this before, is to get themselves to a point where they can move to one of these. And then if it's empty up here, they can move up. If it's not, they're going to be able to attack using the melee rolls. They're hoping it's empty. But that's a bad idea for the Russians. Okay, field battery fire is going to be resolved on the melee table on the 2-to-1 chart. But are there any modifiers? There better be. Taking into account the terrain. See the terrain effect chart 9.6. Well, that doesn't help me. Maybe we got something here in the errata. Well. Well, that didn't help. All right. Well, maybe it'll say something elsewhere. Okay, field battery, it doesn't expend any ammo or anything. I roll the die and modify according to range. I get to fire twice if the opponent's in a depression. If they're in a ravine, I can fire 3 times. So that's the terrain effect on the fire. And the die roll can be modified by cases 4.22 and 4.23, which are going to be French Slavs and English are going to be harder to hit. And other French units are going to be easier to hit. Okay. For melee itself, it's optional. You can gang up on a unit, and you compare the strengths and roll on here. However, you add 1 to the die roll for any attack against a Russian. You subtract 1 against the French. You subtract 2 against French, Zouaves, or English. I'm sorry if I said add 1, I was lying. The French are harder to hit than the table indicates. So everybody's got a modifier either in their favor or against them to be shot. Okay. So the results on here are a letter. That letter is the effect. Either the attacker, the defender, or both players are going to be affected, and then they roll against their morale if they're affected to see the result. The result can be an elimination. There's no cowering in this, if you remember that from Lil. A rout, or a 1 or a 2, which indicates a retreat, not a step loss. Usually numbers are step losses in games. Okay. I believe a rout throws you off the board, but we'll get that until for the remainder of the assault. Okay. So, yes, we have die roll modifiers here. Morale effects are going to take their own modifiers as well. 2 is subtracted from the morale die roll for any unit in assault position against a Russian unit in a bastion that has a strength of 4 or higher. I'll start at 3. 1 is subtracted if it's a unit in the assault position attacking a unit in the bastion with a bastion strength of 2 or 3. 1 is subtracted for any unit which has retreated previously. This is hard to remember. I couldn't do this in Lil either. Maybe easier here, but I don't know. We'll see. And these additions will be cumulative. Okay, so the morale effects, the E is an elimination, which can come back due to replacement points, and R is a rout. They come off the map and they'll come back as reinforcements next turn. A 1 or a 2 indicates you have to retreat, and it's basically the number of bastion positions you have to retreat. But if you're not on a bastion, if you're on an assault, a 1 or a 2 will throw you back to your jumping off point in the parallel. Stacking restrictions being respected. A 2 means you retreat 2 spaces. So if you retreat 1 from the bastion into the assault position, 2 might throw you all the way back here if you had a long walk. Boy, that would be an unhealthy walk. All right. Russian units can also be retreated into their reserve boxes, and their retreat ends there. They don't have to keep going deeper into the city. There's advances after combat if you're attacked. All right, that's the tactical. On to the winter. Basically nothing happens in winter except attrition. You're not allowed to do field army interventions, siege construction, assault, and it looks like the siege construction is the bombardment. No, siege battery fire. The Allies can fire, and the Russians can, both sides can fire their artillery. But it's pretty damn useless time to fire. It might be worth it for the Russians, just because they want to bust up some of those parallels when they can't be fixed. Okay. But the rest of the turn pretty much just doesn't happen. Okay. Winter. Yeah, that's what we just did. Let's not talk about that. Leaders. All right. The Allied commander is our Lord Raglan. Yay. And somebody, Cannon Bear or something like that. Cannon Robert. They each have numbers on them indicating how many brigades they can lead. Cannon Robert can lead 3. This is on an assault. Raglan can lead 2, and basically I've got things divided into brigades. You can decide, sometimes there's really good stuff like the guards. However, I think there's restrictions on how many times you can use the guards. We'll look at that. Okay. So here's a restriction. The French Guard counts as 2 brigades, but let me see if there's a restriction on what you can activate. It doesn't look like it. It looks like you can throw the English Guard in again and again and again. And is it restricted for replacements? That would be another factor there. Looks like you can do that too. So you can just keep bringing the Guard back. So the Guard kick ass for the English. For the French, the Guard is actually 2 units, I think. I'm not sure. I've got... they're not on the board yet. Okay. But I've got units that are G and units that are GD. And I'll have to look to see. I think they're both the same, but yeah, a little matter there. Because it says the division is 2 brigades, essentially. So where are we? We're on the next page. My little hand isn't wet enough. All right. So, Raglan died in July of 1855. There were 2 men who could have replaced him, Simpson and Campbell. Campbell was passed over for political reasons, being a Scot, and nobody would want a Scot in command. So what you do is you roll a die here to see who you get. And if you get Simpson, you get slightly better. You get up to 3 brigades. If you get Campbell, you're going to get 4 brigades. Canrobert is more complicated. The French were under restrictions to perform a lot of action and not lose any lives, which are sort of conflicting ideas. If Canrobert, and then they don't really reflect that in the rules here, if Canrobert fails in an assault, losing 4 units, or loses 4 units, which doesn't strike me as... I would have to say he doesn't take a bastion and loses 4 units, but I don't know. He gets replaced. And you roll a die to see who becomes the commander-in-chief. He has 2 more units, Palliser and Bouquet. Palliser is good. He has 4 brigades. Bouquet is the same as Canrobert with 3 brigades. If that commander-in-chief fails, he'll be replaced with the 3rd one. And then once you've gone through all 3, well, you're stuck with that. For the Russians, they have these marine field batteries. Oh, shit. I bet you I have them deployed on the board. The Russian player can replace any of his 4 marine battery infantry with a marine field battery. That's these. So I'm going to have to redeploy my units because these guys aren't on the board at the beginning of the game. Once you make that replacement, you can't go back the other way. Basically, that's turning your Marines into gunners because you have tons and tons of guns, just not much crew. And you may probably want to wait to do that until some of those reinforcements come in and you have more counters to use. Enfilade fire, this is the same as Lille. I was kind of alluding to this during my description. If there's a siege gun that can fire through a parallel this way, if it can line its shot up so that it goes through between the 2 lines, that parallel is immediately destroyed. So to win the game, you have to take 2 bastions, one of which has to be major. The majors are the Malakoff, the Great Redan, the Mast Bastion, the Central Bastion, and the red, some kind of coleslaw, Radislaw. The others are all going to count as minors. So taking this means you have to take a big one. The Maskalov would work. That kind of gets you right there, as would this. So that's kind of an interesting option, but you have to wait a long time before you can get to that. That's it. I've got some setting things up into different areas. I'm sorry this took so long, but I did want to go through the rules again completely rather than just refer to Lille. Because, like I said, this is the best of the series in my opinion from prior looks at it. And from my memory, I can definitely see where it's got a lot less of the fiddly crap that Lille has in it. Lille's beautiful, but man, it drove me crazy with at least a couple of factors. One of which, keeping track of casualties. Another one, having to fiddle all my units between the blockade zones that I had. Trying to maintain this 12,000 point lead over the defenders and all that. A lot of stuff in Lille really kind of grated on me and makes the experience less pleasant. This one kind of strips all that away. It really does. Yes, there's still a lot of chrome in the game, but the chrome doesn't annoy me in the same sort of way. All right. Had to go back to work today. Had to leave the house. Shocking of all things. Didn't get everything I needed to accomplish, but it does mean that I'm no longer going to be kind of just waiting around on the phone and able to play games. So this may take a little longer.